Operation Anthropoid, Hunting the Hangman, 1942. By the later months of 1941, Nazi Germany had control over nearly all of Europe. Adolf Hitler and his mighty Wehrmacht had pushed the British and French out of France and were actively moving toward Moscow, and it was looking more and more like the Soviet Union would soon fall. In all of the German-occupied countries, like the aforementioned France, there were established and somewhat effective resistance movements that tried to do all they could to operate in secrecy against their Nazi invaders. The same could not be said for Czechoslovakia, whose government was in Britain in exile, led by Edvard Beneš. The Czech resistance had, up to this point, been subpar, especially considering that they were one of the first countries that Germany invaded. The Sudetenland, the Czechoslovakian part around the German border with many German speakers, had been annexed by Hitler in October 1938, and the rest of the country was occupied by March of 1939. This exiled government felt as though they needed to do something to get the resistance movement going, and they did. The Czechoslovak resistance was going to assassinate SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich was one of the chief architects of what would be the Holocaust, as well as the chief of the Reich Main Security Office and the deputy Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia. Heydrich was a cold-hearted individual, and even Hitler was scared of him, calling him the man with the iron heart. Due to his role in planning the final solution to the Jewish question and advocating for Jewish extermination, he was given the haunting nickname, the Hangman, as well as the Butcher of Prague, with Prague being the capital of Czechoslovakia. Therefore, the Czechoslovak resistance had Heydrich high up on the list of possible assassination targets. Everything was in place, and the assassination attempt was confirmed to be on Heydrich and would be sponsored by Beneš and the Czechoslovakian government in exile. The planning began as early as October of 1941 and was given the name Operation Anthropoid. 24 Czech soldiers in exile were selected to go to commando training in Britain, and eventually 2 were chosen for the operation. They were Josef Gabčík and Karl Svoboda, of Slovakian and Czech origin respectively. The assassination was to be carried out on the 28th of October 1941, but Svoboda was injured and this date was pushed back. Jan Kubiš, who was of Czech origin, was to replace Svoboda. The men were flown from the United Kingdom to Czechoslovakia and were taken to Prague, where the attack was ultimately going to take place. The first plan was to kill Heydrich on a train, but the logistics were not there. The second plan was to kill Heydrich in the forest between his home and Prague. Again, the logistics were not there, and this was scrapped as well. The final plan was chosen, and this was to kill Heydrich while he was in Prague. On the 27th of May, 1942, at around 10:30 in the morning, Heydrich was traveling on his daily commute from his residence to the Prague castle. Gabčík and Kubiš waited near a tram stop at a curve in the road, as this curve would force Heydrich and his chauffeur, SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein, to slow their open-topped Mercedes 320 convertible B. Here, Gabčík walked in front of the car and tried to shoot Heydrich while he was in the car. However, the gun Gabčík was using, the British Sten gun, jammed, as they often did due to their cheap manufacturing. Now stopped, Klein stood up in the car and opened fire at Gabčík with his Luger pistol. With the gun jamming, Kubiš stepped in and threw a heavy-duty, modified anti-tank grenade at the Mercedes, which landed near the rear of the car by the back wheel and detonated. Fragments from the explosive ripped through the rear of the car, causing shrapnel from both the car's interior and the grenade itself to go into Heydrich's body. Kubiš's face was also injured in the blast. After the detonation, both Gabčík and Kubiš fired at Heydrich with their pistols but did not hit him. Heydrich then hobbled out of the car and returned fire, however collapsed as his injuries forced him to. Klein then gave chase to Gabčík, who ran into a shop and shot Klein in the leg. Gabčík then escaped the scene. However, he and Kubiš were upset initially because they believed the attack was a failure and they did not know the extent of Heydrich's injuries. Heydrich was brought to a local hospital via van, where it was revealed that he had severe wounds on his left side, with a fractured rib and critical injuries to his diaphragm, spleen, and a lung. After a week, Heydrich's condition appeared to be getting better, but on the 3rd of June, he collapsed and entered shock and ultimately a coma. And this would be it for Heydrich, as on the 4th of June, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich would die at around 4:30 in the morning, officially from septicemia. Operation Anthropoid was a success, and it was the only successful government-authorized assassination of a high-ranking Nazi. There was a funeral service in Prague for Heydrich just days after his death on the 7th. His coffin was then taken to Berlin for another funeral service held in the Reich Chancellery on the 9th of June. The funeral in Berlin was elaborate, with many people, banners, and decorations all over the place. Hitler and Himmler were both the lead people here, with Himmler speaking and Hitler placing medals on the funeral pillow. Despite the large ceremonies and celebrations, Hitler blamed Heydrich for his own death, believing that it was stupid for Heydrich to allow himself to be so vulnerable. The exact burial location for Heydrich is not currently known, but it is somewhere in Berlin. Apparently in 2019, the grave was opened, but there was nothing missing. Heydrich's killers would hide in safe houses and eventually find refuge in a church in Prague until they were ratted out by a member of the Czech resistance who went to the Gestapo. On the 18th of June, 1942, this church was raided by nearly 800 SS and Gestapo personnel. Here, there would be a lengthy shootout that would last 6 long hours. Gabčík, Kubiš, and others would die here. Gabčík committed suicide before he could be captured, and Kubiš succumbed to his injuries during the shootout. The Germans would suffer over 30 casualties at the church as well. The response within Czechoslovakia by the Nazis was nothing short of brutal. Hitler initially wanted to arrest 10,000 Czechoslovakian civilians at random, but was talked out of it. However, intelligence that would turn out to be faulty linked the assassins to the town of Lidice and Ležáky. On the 10th of June, after Hitler had spoken with Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler and Obergruppenführer Karl Hermann Frank, it was decided that any male in either town over the age of 16 would be murdered. The women from Lidice would be taken to concentration camps along with the children, apart from a few who were considered racially acceptable for the Germans. All the women from Ležáky were murdered. Most who went to concentration camps were killed. Both towns were then completely destroyed. Over 1,000 Czechs, mostly if not all innocent civilians, would die in these monstrous reprisals. Austrian-born SS Obergruppenführer Ernst Kaltenbrunner was named chief of the Reich Main Security Office, while Kurt de Lug took over as the new deputy Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia. Heydrich's rules at the Wannsee Conference, the meeting to determine the final solution, were accelerated after his death. The concentration camps Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec opened. These concentration camps were strictly designed and operated for mass extermination, and this was all part of Operation Reinhardt, named after Heydrich. Thanks for watching.